week 2 of the fantasy baseball season, and here's a few hitters I'd look to buy this week. The first guy, Tosca Hernandez of the Toronto Blue Jays. So Hernandez had an amazing season last year with the Blue Jays. 32 home runs, 116 RBIs with a 296 average. And so far, he got off to a good start on the season. 1 home run, 3 RBIs with a 316 average in 19 at-bats. But now he's on the injured list with an oblique strain, and sometimes those injuries take up to a month or two here. So right now, while he's injured and out of action for the foreseeable future here, is Tosca Hernandez. This is a perfect time to get him, because once he comes back, this guy is a staple in this great Toronto Blue Jay lineup here. And he's a guy you're going to want on your fantasy team, because he definitely can help you win your league. And he's definitely underrated as well. A lot of people this season coming into drafts, I saw him fall in a few drafts that I'm in. And I think he's a great hitter, Reese Hernandez. And he has the power. He has some speed as well. And right now, while he's injured, you definitely can make a decent offer where you're not giving up too much and get him on your roster, because once he comes back, he's going to put up the numbers and he's going to be a good contributor to fantasy owners. So right now, I would go out there and get Tosca Hernandez while his trade value is down. The next guy is Anthony Rendon of the Los Angeles Angels. So Rendon, over the last 2 seasons now, it's been a struggle for him. And so far out of the gate here, it's been a struggle. 1 home run, 4 RBIs, 4 runs scored, 2 stolen bases, 35 at-bats with a 200 average, but the 326 on base is pretty good here to the 200 average. So Rendon, we know he's one of the better players, or maybe he's past his prime now, even though I find that hard to believe here, because with Washington, he was a top player in the National League for seasons, and then he signed the big contract with the Angels last offseason, and he's just been struggling. So the last few games here for Rendon: April 15th at Texas, 1 for 4 with a stolen base. April 16th at Texas, 1 for 3 with an RBI and a stolen base. April 19th at Houston, 2 for 5 with a run. And April 20th at Houston, 0 for 3 with a run and an RBI. So right now, he's not doing much of anything. But I still have faith that Rendon could turn things around. And he's too good and has a great approach at the plate still here. Not to get on base, not to drive in runs, and not to be a good hitter. So right now, while he's struggling out of the gate, once again is Rendon, I would go out there and try to make a deal for him, because once this guy could get hot and get things right, he's one of the better hitters in all of baseball at just batting average and getting on base, and that's what you want from your players here. So Anthony Rendon, go out there and get him before it's too late and his value skyrockets, because I think this season could be the season that he definitely could turn things around here for fantasy owners. The next guy is Willson Contreras of the Chicago Cubs. So we know, obviously, catch is a tough position to fill in fantasy baseball. And last season, Contreras, it was a low batting average, but he did have 21 home runs and 57 RBIs. And so far this season, off to a little bit of a slow start. 2 home runs, 3 RBIs, 7 runs scored, only a 229 average, but a decent on base with the low average at 325. And the 2 home runs, not a horrible start. But the good thing here for me with Contreras is he's putting the ball in play. So I think he's going to break out of this slump here, because he's only struck out 8 times in 35 at-bats is Contreras. And this Cub team, they've been pretty decent so far to start the season, especially with Sia Suzuki being a mainstay in that offense. So the last few games here for Contreras: April 15th at the Rockies, 3 for 5 with a run and a rib. April 16th at the Rockies, 0 for 5. April 17th at the Rockies, 1 for 5 with a homer. And then the last 2 games he played: April 18th versus Tampa, 0 for 4. And April 19th versus Tampa, 0 for 3. So he had a rest day in yesterday's ball game, and we'll see him come back here today versus the Pittsburgh Pirates and see if he could get anything going here. Is Willson Contreras, because he's too good of a hitter, like I mentioned, not to be a guy that could contribute to fantasy owners. And also, catcher is a weak fantasy position. So if you could get a guy the caliber of Contreras and get him on your roster for cheaper than you should have, this is a perfect time to do it this week. The next guy's Adolis Garcia of the Texas Rangers. So Garcia, we know he's got 30 home run power, and he showed it last season with 31 home runs, 90 RBIs, even 16 stolen bases with a 243 average, but he's definitely a strikeout machine. The only downside, and his on base isn't great as well, but if you're looking for a pure power hitter, this would be the guy to get on your roster. And he's obviously got more protection in that lineup this season, with Marcus Semien added, Corey Seager, Cole Calhoun, and Brad Miller, who's been a good surprise as well so far. So on the season here for Garcia, 2 home runs, 6 RBIs. He does have the 2 stolen bases, 6 runs scored, only a 175 average and a 277 on base. So right now he's definitely struggling, and the power hasn't been up there as well with 2 so far in the early going. But this is a guy that could carry fantasy teams for weeks on end once he gets that hot streak. And I think a hot streak definitely will come as the weather gets warmer and he gets better matchups. So now he's got a matchup at Seattle to finish the series today. And they go to Oakland, which is one of the worst teams and pitching staffs in all of baseball after blowing up the roster in the offseason. So the last few games here for Garcia has definitely been a struggle. April 15th versus the Angels, 0 for 5 with 3 Ks. April 16th versus the Angels, 0 for 4 with 2 Ks. April 17th, 1 for 4 with a homer and 2 RBIs. April 19th at Seattle, 1 for 4 with a stolen base. And then April 20th at Seattle, 1 for 3 with a rib. So far here, just hasn't gotten anything going is Garcia. But like I mentioned, last season I had him on one of my teams, and he definitely carried me for a month or two in home runs and RBIs, and then he fizzled out, and then he got hot again. So he's definitely the classic streaky power hitter. But right now, while he's in a cold spell, this is a perfect time to go out there and get him, because if you get him on your roster and he gets on a hot streak once again, he could do damage and definitely help your fantasy team. And the fifth and final hitter I look to buy and trade for this week's Reese Hoskins of the Philadelphia Phillies. So the Phillies, they're off to a slow start here in the early going of the season, but they got too many great hitters and power hitters on this roster not to get going at the same time and put up a lot of runs early and often in ball games. So on the season here for Hoskins, 1 home run, 4 RBIs, 8 runs scored, only a 220 average, and a 373 on base, which is definitely great, though, compared to that average. And last season, though, it wasn't a great year for him, but he did have the 247 average with 27 and 71. So Hoskins, we know he's a 30, 35 home run capability guy. And right now, while he's off to the slow start, it's a perfect time to get him on your team as well. Because like I mentioned, once all these hitters get going in this Philly offense, these guys are going to get a lot of fastballs, a lot of great hitting pitches, because there's going to be no easy out in this lineup. And Hoskins, once he gets going, he's another guy that could carry a team for a while in fantasy league. So the last few games for him, April 16th at Miami, 1 for 3 with 2 runs. April 17th at Miami, 0 for 4. April 18th at the Rockies, 0 for 2. April 19th at the Rockies, 1 for 4 with a run. And April 20th at the Rockies, 0 for 4 with a run. So right now, he's definitely struggled in the last 4 or 5 games here as Hoskins. But the Phillies go back home, and we'll see if he could get things going. But right now, in the meantime, I would try to make an offer to the Hoskins owner. And I don't think I got to give much at all. Maybe a mid-level starter to get him, or just another decent bat that's off to a hot start, but won't have a complete season when it's all said and done like Hoskins will. So that's a few hitters I look to try to trade for and buy here in week 2 of the fantasy baseball season.